creates a potential threat. And so you asked earlier what we can do in terms of education and legislation. I think from my standpoint, it really starts with educating. I think people have to understand what the potential is for this crop and how it can support, a different shift in communities, rural communities in particular, for economics. And I think the old drivers of supply and demand with things like, fossil fuels or other carbon-based, energy sources, I think it's going to be an education process to make people understand that.
Well, and also an education process for legislators as well, because I was looking into this a couple of months ago, and I've been writing a white paper for the last 6 months that, it keeps evolving as I learn more. When you look at the subsidies that are now being put into some of the most profitable companies in the world, namely, let's start with like Exxon, $11 billion in tax incentives that they could be paying into the economy that are being given to them to proliferate our dependence on fossil fuels. And I mean, there are a lot of different points of view on this, and I recognize that. But if you took even just a portion of those subsidies and started putting them into hemp infrastructure, it seems as though the people who are appropriating those funds or appropriating the incentives to fossil fuels could be educated to understand that appropriating some of those incentives into a new hemp infrastructure would really help. But how do we get that message across to Congress?
I'll let Mike take that one first.
Yeah, I don't. This is something I've been working at for a long time, so I don't have an answer. But I think to further the point that you're making, most of these incentives that are given are, those incentives are taken away from the communities that are, having bad land use management or, fracking or whatever's happening. So, you're absolutely right. It's critical that some of those incentives, there's a way to, and not just hemp. I think that local food production, right? You spoke about our founding fathers. They screamed about hemp for independence, but they also screamed about people being resilient, independent, and that's what truly makes us free. And so not even just hemp production. How do we turn that back into local food production systems? How do we take the money that we're incentivizing them and reinvest it back into these economies? And that's not a conversation anybody but probably a handful of us want to have, but it's absolutely right. They're taking money, those incentives are taking money that could be used to revitalize communities and put in infrastructure that, yes, allowed, a town like mine to put in a small textile mill to stop growing cotton, right? Let's start growing hemp. And just on land use, cotton is, I think 3% of global agriculture production, but it uses a third of the water and a third of the pesticides. So yeah, we should be using that money. But, we've been trying to be creative about how we can get money for these types of projects, but it's not an easy thing, and nobody wants to have those conversations because of the way the system operates, and we don't have enough money to have a big enough voice at this point in time.
Yeah. You mentioned the BT cotton is a huge problem. And when you consider that a lot of the fiber that comes from cotton could be grown a lot more sustainably with hemp, which uses a fraction of the water, and you can grow it without toxic pesticides. You can actually make your own pesticides out of the compost of hemp. But also what I wanted to mention was that along the lines of the BT cotton, there's a monopoly when it comes to Monsanto and the seeds that are being given to farmers that keep them in this perpetual chain of dependence on those seedless crops. So they have to keep buying the crops, and it's poisoning our land. And I'm not educated enough to speak on subsidies that they get, but I know that, there's like the fox guarding the hen house when it comes to Monsanto's lobby actually running things, in our USDA. And for a long time, they've been a part of our agricultural advisory committees in Congress. and, with their lobbies especially. And I wonder, as hemp becomes more and more popular, is this going to help rescue, if you will, the farmers that have become dependent upon it or pushed out of the market altogether in food production because of these big farms consolidating and pushing out the smaller farmers? I mean, how can hemp be a solution for that?
Well, you're on with two guys that hope we figure part of it out. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all complex. I mean, the subsidies rule, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the way it works. And I mean, like I said, I mean, there's thousands of organizations that have worked on this, and not to harp on the BT cotton, but I have friends that are first responders that are part of these active groups that our first responders are getting cancer faster rates because this is heat cotton. Their inner cotton layer is BT cotton, and it's leaching, right? Because there's still, you can't grow a plant with BT and not have BT and other chemicals that come out in the plant material, so these guys are getting sick. It's in our clothes, it's everywhere. And I don't know how we incentivize. I mean, there's two ways, right? I mean, I know how we do it. There's two ways. Number one, we vote when there's an election, and we vote with our whole conscience. And then, and the other is we vote when we shop. So, I mean, as consumers, half the problem's the lobby, and I say the other half is us. It's all of us. It's the world we live in and the way in which we consume. And not much is going to change until we recognize that, at least in my opinion.
And from my perspective, it goes back to that winners and losers piece of conversation that, right now the way it's set up is that winners are chosen. And the way that we permeate or get into that side of the industry is to start putting money into the system that's already in place. And hemp, a lot of people have taken a wait and see approach with this crop to see what's going to happen and if it's actually going to come to fruition the way people have talked about it. But I think ultimately, if Mike and I are successful at what we are doing, we have the ability to sort of change that paradigm and start to shift the conversation where this is not only, just a CBD crop anymore. This is a fiber crop. This is a food source. This provides a lot of different alternatives that legislators will listen to and get in communities. And the fact that Kentucky drove this, tells you all you need to know. This was a necessity for the state of Kentucky to sort of pivot off of tobacco and other issues that Mike's well more informed than I am.
Well, Kentucky has certainly led the way when it comes to hemp. And, I credit Kentucky's national legislators with pushing hemp legislation through. And that's a really good thing. But, we still have the problem of the big lobbies from the large farm companies, Monsanto namely, and trying to get legislators to pay attention to the smaller groups that don't have such large lobbying efforts in Washington is a challenge, I think, across the board, no matter what the industry is. But if you had your druthers, if you had an audience right now with legislators, what would be your primary message? Trent, let's start with you and then go to Mike.
Well, I think we do have an audience with legislators. I mean, I think legislators are listening. If I had my druthers, look, we're not going to come in as a hemp agribusiness and change the rules, but what we can do is we can come in with credibility, with a track record of success, and with a plan, and to be a part of that conversation with legislators to say, look, we're not the panacea. We're not going to fix everything in the hemp space, but we certainly can shift the paradigm gradually. And I think that opportunity is there. It's on us and other companies similar to us to execute and follow through with farmers and actually get the product to market, so that we do have those funds to play in the unfortunate space that we're in right now, where money talks and lobbies are a necessity. But if I had my druthers, that rule book wouldn't exist, but it does. And so we have to play by those rules.
Mike?
And I think that I would say first, I think that the way that we get the ear, as Trent said, is by being successful and by, getting our infrastructure and getting our farmers paid, and then saying, hey, here's a success story. And, as far as if I was in front of them today, I don't think I would say anything different than what I say when I'm there. I live in a small town that is poor, obviously, I guess American poor, not to classify that with anything in third world countries, but I live in a poor community and there are no jobs, there's no infrastructure, and my trees are getting cut down and my kids are going to waste. The kids here are on drugs, and that's because we need jobs. And this, you have to find a way to make sure that these jobs stay in my community and that my community gets paid fair for these jobs. And that's what I always say. And I don't think I would change that at all, because that's the truth. And we need to think about, to do that, we need to think about how we're deploying government money and how we're building rural infrastructure, because the way we're doing it now is not working. And that's the message.
Yeah. Well, that's
really the.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just to add to that. That's really the third wave commitment, right? That's our business model with Hub and Spoke. So for us to sort of start where we started, it was really, how do we support farmers? That was our first question. And what we realized is that, a lot of people were throwing seed in the ground, being promised, X number of dollars per acre for their crop. And what they lacked was infrastructure. So third wave farms, really, that's our whole model. Is we go out, we invest in the infrastructure to support farmers in a given region, and then we expand that out nationally. And so that's kind of what our whole business model is supporting that infrastructure in those rural communities like Mike's to start to bring jobs back, to start to bring, mitigation of risk for farmers.
So you read my mind when you added to that. And my next question was going to be, well, how do you engage the farmers? What is your pitch when you do talk to farmers?
Well, most of the people that are talking to farmers are farmers. So, it's not even really a pitch. It's just an understanding. Whether it's me or Shelby or Jeff or any one of our other guys on the field talking to a farmer, we know. We look around and there's not a lot to talk about. So what we talk about is the upside and how we want them to be successful and how we want to help them integrate other crops. And we just explain our commitment, explain what we're passionate about, and it's not a big pitch. I think that we know what's going on farms. We know what's happening on dairy farms. We know what's happening on, grain and corn farms right now. I don't even think it's a pitch. I think the reality is we have to find ways to work together again, because this get bigger, get out model is not working. And we have to collaborate. And I think that farmers naturally want to collaborate. Information is fairly free flowing from one farmer to the next in terms of production techniques. But I think the way that the infrastructure has been built, it's forced everybody into a silo. And we show up, let's break that silo. Let's start working with our neighbors and let's build some stuff that's going to support some production around here. And let's get some supply out of, Kentucky or Indiana or Oregon or wherever it is to market.
Yeah, and I think what Mike's team does so well on the ag side is Mike always mentions this to me, but he really manages expectations on a day-to-day basis with farmers. And, I think the industry we're in right now is so volatile and chaotic that there's a lot of promises being made out there to farmers that just aren't coming true. So, what we really try to do is say, okay, how can we help support? One way is through infrastructure, which is really Mike's team on the ag side. Then we also try to find viable markets for their product to sell, so that they have some understanding of price and where this is going to go. I think that's really what bridges the gap between Mike's world and my world, as he runs, a seamless operation on the ag side. And then together we put our heads together and figure out how to do the rest.
That makes sense completely. And the advantages for farmers to start rotating their crops, from my understanding,